So when you were talking about the difficulties that you meet communicating with most of Russian movements, even those with which you share some political affiliation. And you mentioned the concept of Russia united and undivided. And this resonates to me with an issue that I'm finding when I talk about the relationship between Ukraine and Russia with Italian communists mostly, which is they cannot conceive to consider anything that Russia has ever done as colonialistic. Russia has no colonies. Whatever is Russia is Russia. That to me is immediately absurd, but it's obvious that it's a very well entrenched conviction that is very difficult to pry open. And then you can start listing genocides. You can starting from the Circassians, going to the border with Finland, blah blah blah. The impression that I got is that basically is that throughout the 21st century, somewhat basically Russian propaganda colonized the decolonization discourse in a way. It creates zones of silence in which people just don't look and change the balance. And this then is reflected also on the buzzword of multipolarism, the multipolar world, which is somewhat a world in which authoritarian powers are free to do whatever they want, which is a very weird thing to find in the leftist discourse. So I guess at this point, what I'm curious is, and I'm sure that you must have had this kind of debate also internally in Ukraine at certain points, from what you described earlier, pre-invasion, pre-2022 invasion, and even worse, pre-2014 also invasion. So I was wondering, did you find ways to pry open this discourse because for me normally if I put out a contradiction, that's all I need to do. I believe that if you show a contradiction, that's all that is necessary to go to a next level of discussion. That doesn't seem to be the case. This idea of Russia as a non-colonial, non-imperial power is too well entrenched. How do you fight that? Or did you have any success with that, in particular with Western, because it's easier when someone has been in the Soviet Union?
Let's do Alena, then I, or vice versa.
Yeah, I don't know. It was a difficult task, which I actually at some point dropped to do, because there are people who see the world in this geopolitical way. Probably they read the same things, which I know I read, like world system analysis and Samir Amin and this kind of Marxist tradition. And in this, if you see the world just as this blocks of powers, then such places as Ukraine, they are just being erased. And for me, not even a contradiction is needed. For me, what is needed is that I am Ukrainian, though having a father from Siberia, which was also colonized by Russia, and having non-Slavic ethnicity. And then being from Donetsk, where I learned Ukrainian as one of my first languages. So, and all this kind of experiences, they were erased. And I would say that kind of thing which actually changed with this war is very similar to how homophobia works. We live in a homophobic society, even if there are some more progressive countries, less progressive countries. So we were for years living in a society where Russian imperialism is something which is just there. It's always there. It always diminishes you. It always like calls you as a part of this big Russian something culture. But the invasion, it's actually a situation when like homophobes actually start killing gay people, and that's what happened. So it was always there, but we were probably like, but we were in a situation that like, okay, probably if we talk and talk and talk and talk, as now with homophobes, we still do not talk. We do not like stab them immediately. So this like, and this is something which is very difficult to see if you are a Russian left-wing imperialist, or if you are like a Western super privileged guy which never had a raising of your identity as a common sense. And I mean, I'm not a historian, of course. Like historians, they can give a lot of examples. But for me, I am the example. I Ukrainian. I do exist, and I think it was important. It was not like it was impossible to convince some people who already see the world as some blocks. But for some people who were never, interested in Eastern Europe in general, but then, they start asking questions. And when we were answering those questions, when we were saying, okay, we are Ukrainian. Yeah, we speak like Ukrainian and some people speak Russian. Yeah, we have conflict on like many different levels, but we are still there. And it worked, like very basic argument. But to be honest, at some point, many activists just like stopped discussing, with people who are not ready to see us as subjects in politics.
Okay.
I think Artem wanted to say something.
Yeah, I can add a little bit that here we can, in this region we can see this principle of accumulation through deprivation, which used by Russian imperialism. How it works? It creates a hotspot in Transnistria near the Moldova. It creates hotspot in Ossetia. It's annexed part of Georgian territory. It creates hotspot in Donetsk near Ukraine to make labor cheaper there. It also have influence on Armenian economy and policy, and in Ukrainian in past. So we had this experience when Russian oligarchs bought some oil and gas like sources and just never developed it. They stopped to serve it, and it became an ecological disaster. But on the market, there has no competition in the region, and no one could bought these sources of oil and gas anymore. And in Armenia, for example, they did this economy model for last 30 years. They bought some assets and never developed it, and it made Armenian people went to the abroad to work in Moscow as cheaper migrant workers. They give some credits to Ukrainian past, to Armenia also, and now it's still happening in Armenia, to like the corrupting economies to have influence on this. So in our case in Ukraine, it was cheaper credits cheaper oil and gas for the presence of their military bases in Crimea. So it was one of the main targets in this agreements. So they never paid us Ukrainians for their presence of their military base. They just gives us a discount on oil and gas, and it is a way of this accumulation through deprivation, which we have in our region, and it's kind of a way of capitalist model which Russia trying to implement here. Other countries implement the same model in other places. So Russia not is the opposing country to the Western capitalism. It is the part of global capitalism, which use the catastrophes to exploit people who flee from catastrophes, which can create new catastrophes to disasters, to exploit people who fled from there, to make capital be destroyed, to create demand on new capital, to avoid overproduction described by Marx in almost 200 years ago.
Then, thank you. Is there any other questions from the public, from the audience?